Hello everyone, hope you're doing well. Today we're going to look at another scene from Berserk, an attempt to draw out its psychological and symbolic meaning, and how it can help us understand the human psyche. The scene is famously called The Torture of Griffith. It's a scene that is known for its character development, exploration of human nature, themes of sacrifice and ambition, the impact it has on other characters, and for its emotional depth. But it is rarely noted for its exceptional and effective way of showing patterns of the human psyche and the process of psychological development in humans. As always, we'll take a Jungian perspective on this analysis. According to Carl Jung, the ego represents an individual's conscious identity and their sense of self. The self, on the other hand, encompasses the totality of the individual's psyche, including both conscious and unconscious elements. Griffith's experience of torture profoundly affects his ego and self. Prior to the torture, Griffith's ego was characterized by a strong sense of ambition, control, and self-assuredness. However, the extreme physical and psychological trauma he endures during the captivity shatters his ego, leaving him in a state of profound vulnerability and powerlessness. This trauma causes a fragmentation of his self, leading to an internal struggle and the emergence of a repressed aspect of his psyche, also known as his shadow. Carl Jung proposed that the collective unconscious contains universal symbolic patterns, called archetypes, which influence our thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. In Griffith's case, several archetypes come into play. One prominent archetype is the hero, which Griffith embodies through his charisma, leadership qualities, and ability to inspire others. This archetype drives him to overcome challenges and fulfill his grand destiny. But there becomes a point where Griffith is unable to distinguish himself from the archetype, almost seeing himself as the archetype itself. He sees himself as the ideal human in a sense, the ideal hero who is charismatic, draws attention, and is admired by everyone around him. What this does is he begins to see the power and energy that the archetype gives him as being unique to himself. Often, when individuals are called narcissistic or have a disillusioned sense of who they are, it's hard to identify why this is. Through a Jungian perspective, the reason for this is they begin to identify with the archetype as unique to who they are as a person, rather than a universal common biological inclination. In this sense, the problem arises as Griffith sees charisma, desire for power and control, and the hero's journey as unique to who he is and something that is special to him. This leads to a sense of godlike power. A common example of this is a person in your everyday life who's narcissistic and has an exaggerated sense of self-importance and grandiosity, without any sense of transparency of the universality of imperfection. This way of conceptualizing one's life and psyche leads to an inevitable downfall of the person. This act of inflation becomes catastrophic for that individual's psyche. It manifests itself through the individual as they identify with the archetype, and they believe that they themselves are the archetype of the hero. In this state of active inflation, Jung states that the person does something that is an inflated act, almost as if the shadow takes control of the person. It's an act that is more than what a person can handle. From this framework, Griffith believes that he's capable of doing anything as he lays in bed with the princess and takes away the prized possession of the king. But through this active inflation motivated act, he gets rejected by the archetype, or the ideal he once held. He's betrayed by his friends, he's alienated from himself, and has no access to the psychological energy or the archetypical energy, which came through the form of presenting him a pathway to being a hero. You may have seen this within your friendships, within your family members, and at your workplace. Someone who is so confident that they can stay away from sins, but ends up succumbing to their alcohol addiction. Or a coworker who is extreme in his confidence of delivering a promise, but comes short-handed. Due to their self-indulged nature of narcissism, they make big mistakes at work or within their relationships. There are two elements to this psychological state of being. One is, as mentioned, the confusion of the archetype as unique to oneself, and the second is the lack of integration of the shadow or the darker sides of who you are as a person. This torture relays all of these psychological states, and how such states have led to the downfall of Griffith. Now he is faced head-on with the consequences of his active inflation of the ego. Now he sees himself as capable of downfall. A man who was once close to the ideal and who saw himself as unique to the archetype of a leader and as a hero is now a frail and damaged individual who's capable of nothing. This is the pattern and the result of not being able to balance the psyche by noting that the paths you take in life, your desires, your dreams, and your sense of self is a gift from the collective unconscious of what makes us all human. You gain energy from this, but the confusion of the archetype as unique to you creates chaos and downfall, which inevitably leads you to face your shadows in the most extreme manners. This is shown clearly after the torture of Griffith. A man who was once adored by females is now repulsive, and a man who once saw sexual desires as mere distractions to his nature of a hero now seeks to feel pleasure, and rather than admiration, is faced with pity by Casca. The concept of the shadow, another essential element of Jungian psychology, is also prominent in this torture scene. The shadow represents the darker, repressed aspects of the psyche that are often hidden from conscious awareness. Griffiths' prolonged suffering and torment during the torture brings these shadow elements to the surface, forcing him to confront his own vulnerability, powerlessness, and the depths of his desires. The emergence of the shadow in this context can be seen as a necessary step in Griffith's psychological development, as it allows him to acknowledge and integrate these suppressed aspects of himself. The torture scene serves as a catalyst for Griffith's psychological transformation, challenging his sense of self and forcing him to confront the darkest aspects of being. By enduring and transcending this extreme suffering, Griffiths undergoes a profound psychological metamorphosis, leading to a more complex and integrated understanding of who he is as a person. This torture scene can be seen as an exploration of the unconscious and the turmoil that it causes individuals. You, the person watching, can also take this consciously through the exploration of your own deepest desires and shadows. You may want a relationship with someone. You may want to seek hedonistic pleasures, or may want to be dominated or submissive. But this is all masked over by your ego and your persona. The moment you acknowledge that you are capable of desires that make you socially unacceptable to not only others, but to how you view yourself, you have to enter into the cage where you are tortured like Griffith. And this provides a loss of identity and understanding of who you are as a person. But this process is necessary for growth, and acknowledging this creates a profound change in how you see yourself, the people around you, and your perception of the world. In this sense, this torture scene is symbolic in representing the journey that every human must take for psychological wholeness, which is to journey into and project various structures of the unconscious into your conscious self.